Okay, I guess we're ready for contracts here, and this says contracts the beginning, and it's just the beginning because there are 4 weeks of contracts. So this is just the beginning. This particular video is about the language we use for contracts, and just a little bit of some of the basics. Part 2 is going to be about what some of the terminology means. And we'll in particular be looking at the requirements for a contract in part 2 of this lecture. So let's kind of get started here. If you've read the book, you know it's kind of legalese, sometimes difficult to explain. So what I've done is given you what we're looking at, such as sources of the contract. This is what's written in the book, and it is kind of, it seems like you're chasing your tail sometimes with it. So down here, I've given you an interpretation of it. So the sources of contract law, much of it is common law from all contracts, for all contracts except for sales and leases. Now by common law, what we're saying is what has been the precedent in earlier courts. So remember that. And that is for contracts basically that involve services, real estate, employment, or insurance. But for the contracts that involve sale of goods and leases, you're going to be following the Uniform Code, Commercial Code, UCC, because that's going to come under statutory law. So there are 2 sources. You have common law for services, real estate, employment, and insurance, and other things of that nature. And then you have statutory law for the sale of goods and for leases. And then after going through that, you have to ask, what is the function of a contract? And my good golly, if you read the paragraph, contract law is needed to ensure compliance with a promise or to entitle a non-breaching party to relief when a contract is breached. Basically what that's saying is it assures parties in private agreements that promises made will be enforceable, such as if you have an agreement among 2 parties. It's just ensuring that the contract, if it is legal, can be enforceable. And the other reason is because it provides stability and predictability for commerce in the United States. So contracts are really important. It goes right back to why do we have law or why do we have regulations? It's to provide stability in the economy. Per the textbook, you need to remember this. Contract law is necessary to ensure compliance with a promise or to entitle the innocent party to some form of relief if that promise is breached or broken. So a definition of a contract, again, it gets kind of wordy. Basically, a definition of a contract is a promise or set of promises. When broken, the law provides a remedy of monetary damages or be required to perform a promised act. Basically, that's what it is saying is if a promise is broken and it's a legal contract, a contract provides a remedy through the law. So here's a question. True or false? Contract law has one source, common law. Now, how is all of this decided? Or how do we decide when we've formed a contract? So you have to have a way to define that. Otherwise, we could say, oh, I had a contract with them and not have any guidelines to go by. The intent of a contract is determined by the objective theory of contracts. And that theory involves what the parties said when entering into the contract, how the parties acted or appeared, an intent may be inferred, and the circumstances surrounding the contract. All three of those are looked at when you try to determine if a contract has been formed. Did the parties say, I want to enter into a contract and this is what we agree upon? Or this is my offer and was that offer accepted? Did they act as if there was a contract? I mean, did they comply? Did they enter into doing actions that would complete the contract? And finally, the circumstances surrounding the transaction. So those, that is what you call the objective theory of contracts, and that determines if a contract has been formed, and there are three items that are looked at. Finally, we look at freedom of contract and freedom from contract. Basically what this saying is that you are going to enter into the contract by choice, voluntarily. And it's actually written into the U.S. Constitution. It's called Freedom of Contract, and it's Article 1, Section 10. And this is a fundamental public policy of the United States, that you enter into a contract that is not illegal. The contract has a bargain. It has agreements. There's no unreasonable agreements in restraint of trade. It isn't contrary to public policy. It's not oppressively unfair, and it's between parties of disparate bargaining power, which means you're even. You know, somebody is not going to go into a contract being forced to go into a contract because of an uneven balance of power between the two. So freedom of contract is really important. There are requirements for a valid contract, and all four of these have to be met. First of all, there has to be an agreement. That means there has to be an offer, and the offer has to be accepted. There has to be consideration, and consideration is there's something of worth that is exchanged, something of value. You have to have contractual capacity, which means you have to be legally competent to enter into a contract. And finally, the contract, whatever you're contracting, it has to be a legal action. If it's illegal, there is no contract. Question. True or false? It's a brand new tongue. Intent is determined by the objective theory of contracts. True or false? We've had the requirements of a valid contract. And here we look at the defenses to an enforceable defenses to the enforceability of a contract. What that's looking at is the voluntary consent. If both parties did not enter into this contract willingly, you can take it to court, and you can probably get it made void. And there are instances where some contracts have to be in a certain form, such as a written form. And we'll look at that later on, I think in this chapter and in future chapters. So you have to look at also what makes a valid contract. So you've got 3 types of valid contracts, and an explanation for a void contract literally is there is no contract, and there's no legal obligation. For a valid contract, though, an enforceable contract is defined as the contract that can be enforced because there's no legal defense against it. It means every requirement is met and there is nothing that can be taken into court. A voidable contract is a contract that a party has the obligation or has the option of avoiding or enforcing the contract. Sometimes you may sign a contract and it will you have so many days to void this contract or to remove yourself from the contract, would be an example of that. And an unenforceable contract is a contract that cannot be enforced because of a legal defense, such as it wasn't voluntarily entered into, it's not in the right form, or any of the other things that we mentioned prior to this. So, valid contract, void contract, and these are the defenses. We want to look at the types of contracts, and this is what we're going to look at in class, giving examples of each one of these. There are 6 explanations here of a contract. There's a bilateral contract, which is a promise for a promise. A unilateral, which is a promise for an act. A formal contract is a contract that requires special form for creation. Remember, we talked about that. If the contract isn't in a special form, it's then void, or it can be made void. An informal contract requires no special form. And then there are contracts that are expressed, which are formed by words, or implied, and they are formed by, at least at part, conduct, implication, that the contract has been offered and accepted. So those are the types. Now, here's a question. There are 4 requirements for a contract. They are, and then you will select all that apply. And finally, here is a schematic, and I kind of wanted you to look at it so you could see. You have bilateral and unilateral. Those can also be void, valid, void, voidable, or unenforceable. They can be expressed, implied, or a quasi-contract, which is, we'll cover that as we go through all of the contracts in class. And here's a little bit of explanation of these. When a contract is complete, it is called executed. When it is yet to be complete or in the process of being completed, it's executorial. It's in the process. I'm having a really hard time with words today. Also, a contract can be formal, which means it has to be in a special form, or informal, which it doesn't have any stipulations to its form. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about in class. And this is going to be a lot of information, so take good notes, and I'll make an at-a-glance for all of this so that you can follow it. Thank you.